Do you want to be a great spouse? Because I had every intention to be a great husband. I mean, nobody gets married saying, man, I promise to be the most average husband. I promise to be so average in every way that I loved you. I mean, nobody is going to be more mediocre of a husband than I am. And yet, after 7 years, 50% of us are divorced. Sometimes, after only a few years, we somehow go from lovers to what feels like enemies, don't we? And I had every intention to be great. The problem is, as you know, intentions don't matter without follow-through, do they? It's not your intentions that make a difference. It's the steps you're taking, the paths you're walking, the actions you're implementing that actually make a difference. And men especially tend to do very little when it comes to intentionally strengthening or growing the connection or closeness in our relationships. And we tend to think everything will just work out, won't it? Until one day it doesn't. And the problem was, I only learned later that I wasn't on a path to being a great husband. I was on a path towards disconnection and distance, and ultimately divorce. And I didn't know it, just like some of you don't know it. Leading marriage psychologist John Gottman once said, marriages die in the conversations that never happen. You could say it another way, marriages die in the questions you never asked. And that's what happened in my marriage. We didn't ask these questions, because that would only start conflict. That would only start another fight. Is that the way it is in your marriage? Because we eventually drifted apart, and the relationship died. And some of you watching need to wake up. There's a reason 50% of marriages fail. There's a reason that in half of the marriages that stay together, one or both partners would say they aren't feeling fulfilled or content. It's not because they didn't want a great marriage. You want to know why my marriage failed? Because I don't know what I don't know. But what I don't know can still hurt my spouse and destroy my marriage. And I had to realize the hard way that ignorance and apathy and selfishness and pride kill marriages every day. But nobody thinks they're guilty of them. So we just keep making the same mistakes over and over that we did in our previous relationships. Or we keep making the same mistakes that our parents did, don't we? And we fail to realize that busyness and putting your marriage on cruise control hurts it. Emotional laziness and selfishness sabotage your marriage. Pride and unintentional neglect will kill your marriage whether you're aware of it or not. And do you know the first question I had to ask on the path to saving my marriage? I had to ask, is it possible I'm neglecting you or being self-centered in this marriage and not even realizing it? Are you willing to ask that? Are you willing that that could even be a possibility in your marriage? Because almost all men want more sex and less fighting in their marriage. Almost all men want to set themselves up for a successful, mutually fulfilling marriage. But few men know how to get there. Few men wonder why their plan of apathy isn't working. And few men are humbling themselves and asking the tough questions in their marriage. So let's start by being curious instead of confrontational. Let's start by actually listening instead of arguing. Let's start by being interested in how our spouse feels and exploring her perspective on this marriage, because that's what leads to connection and closeness that we all really want. But first you need to realize that the majority of us were set up to fail. The majority of us are already pre-programmed to undermine the very pillars of what makes a marriage succeed and not even realize we're doing it. Heck, most men don't even think they have needs in a relationship. If that's true, why did you get together in the first place? That wasn't to satisfy a need in you for companionship, was it? I mean, why do you complain so much about appreciation or sex? Is it possible that you need those things in your relationships to feel valued? Let me warn the men out there, empathy and vulnerability and intimacy and validation and consideration and healthy communication and conflict resolution won't come naturally for you. Do you know what's easy for me? Anger and defensiveness. Blame comes easy. Criticism comes easy. Contempt and mocking come easy for me. Laziness and emotional avoidance are natural for me. I don't have to be intentional about dismissing her feelings as not my responsibility or calling her too sensitive. I don't have to be intentional about forgetting to prioritize affection and closeness and connection in this marriage. That happens naturally, and that's the natural default for some of you too. And I don't have time to dig into why you might respond in a destructive or toxic way. The only thing I need you to take away from this video is that they are cancers in your marriage, and they will kill it regardless of how neutral you feel about them. You have destructive behaviors that you need to stop. I have destructive behaviors that I need to get rid of. The first of which is not knowing what they are. You want to be successful? You want to be great? It requires humility. It requires hitting pause on the way you normally do things and being open to exploring a new way. So ask yourself, what conversations have you potentially avoided? What questions have you dismissed as unimportant? But maybe, if you asked your spouse, they're very important to them. So have a desire to know them again. Have the courage and the humility to ask these questions, because they will only make your marriage better. No one has ever made their marriage worse by intentionally asking these questions and then listening with understanding and empathy and validation and consideration instead of arguing or interrupting or correcting. And most people won't ask. I know full well that it'll probably only be 1% of the people that watch this video that actually ask their spouse. But that's because most people aren't actually interested in being a great husband or having a great marriage. They would much rather keep doing what's not working. Some of you don't even know your spouse anymore because you're too oblivious to ask, and they've given up on wishing you would. And that just leads to distance and disconnection and divorce. But for the men who have the courage to ask these questions, you need to be warned. This could result in some heated discussions. Even though you're doing the right thing, you might uncover some hurt and frustration, and she might tell you how she really feels, which might be angry, which absolutely could leave you feeling attacked. You might feel like she's calling you a failure. You might feel like you need to avoid having these conversations in the future because conflict is bad for your marriage, right? But the truth is, these conversations need to happen if you truly want a great marriage. Remember, it's not the conflict that's bad. What's bad is the way we handle conflict with criticism and blame and invalidation and contempt that leads to further disconnection and pain. It doesn't have to be that way. There's a better path, but we have to be willing to do something different. Whenever there's conflict, whenever she comes at you heated or passionate or says that she's hurt, remember, winning an argument means the marriage loses. So stop trying to win and instead see conflict as a way to learn about your spouse again. What she needs, what she fears, what hurts her, what makes her feel neglected or unappreciated or not valued or prioritized. Those are very important things to know. You should know those things. This is a chance to learn them. So make it a goal to listen and understand instead of proving that you aren't at fault. This isn't about right or wrong. This is about being there for your spouse, the person that we say we love and care about the most. Remember, if something is important to them, it's important to us. Well, this is her way of saying, this is important to me. When she's upset or admits to feeling hurt, your goal is remembering that how she's feeling is just as important as what she's saying. So pay attention to both. Take all the focus off you and put it on her. Let her speak. Don't interrupt or correct. And simply explore the question, what is she feeling? Look out for the hurt underneath the anger. Pay attention to the unmet need or desire under the frustration. Try to understand her perspective or argument so well that you could articulate it and then repeat it back to her. And then say, I can completely understand how you could feel that way, even if you don't agree with it. And you will be amazed at how the tension in that argument goes down. You will be amazed at how the conflicts and the complaints lessen over time when she actually feels safe to share, when she feels heard and understood and validated. I dare you to try that instead of whatever you're doing now. But don't be fooled. It takes practice and emotional maturity and self-awareness and humility, something very few people think are important in their marriage. All right, so here are the questions that I believe make or break your marriage. If you think these questions are stupid, then you're stupid. If you think these aren't worth asking, you might simply be afraid of the answers you might get. If you don't think that these lead to a deeper connection and closeness with your wife, then you don't understand what a marriage needs from you to survive and thrive, because great marriages are always filled with honesty and transparency. All right, question number 1. How do you feel most loved and prioritized? See, here's what I didn't understand. The way I naturally give love isn't necessarily the way she receives love. And that's a problem, because I can give her all the physical touch and gifts that I want. But if she feels loved and prioritized through acts of service or words of affirmation, then she's left feeling unloved, even though from my perspective, I'm putting in the effort. And men love to complain about the effort that they are putting in, but they rarely stop to ask, is it possible I need to redirect my efforts so that they actually do what I intended them to do? And the first step is to ask. There is no excuse for a husband not to know how his wife feels loved and prioritized the most and not be intentionally and consistently doing those things. All right, number 2, can you name the last time you either felt neglected or abandoned or taken for granted in this relationship? And if you can't think of anything, what's something that would lead to those feelings that I can avoid doing? Men, you will eventually unintentionally hurt or neglect your wife, but that doesn't make you a bad spouse. What makes you a bad spouse is by ignoring it or blowing it off when she brings it to your attention. There is no excuse for not knowing what leads your wife to feel neglected or taken for granted and not be intentionally avoiding those things. Number 3, what are some specific things I can do to help build our trust and emotional closeness together? I guarantee the husband who has ever asked this question gets more action than you do. I'm not saying that's the goal, I'm just saying it's true. Trust isn't simply confidence that your spouse isn't going to cheat on you. Trust is a feeling of safety with them, that you can rely on them. You can rely on them for emotional safety. You can rely on them to listen. You can rely on them to respond with kindness and compassion when you say that you're hurt, even if they unintentionally caused it. When trust is chronically broken, the relationship breaks with it. And I get it that most men couldn't care less about intimacy or empathy or emotional connection, but unfortunately, you decided to marry a woman. You didn't marry Larry down at the shop. You decided to get married to someone who is emotionally sensitive, didn't you? And who most likely values those things and needs those things in their relationship to feel secure and safe and wanted and valued. And the lack of those isn't a neutral event. For them, it means they can't emotionally continue in this relationship. It means the relationship dies, regardless of your intentions. And one thing that men have completely neglected when it comes to emotional connection is affection. You need to be affectionate with her again. That means you need to hold her more, you need to touch her more, you need to kiss her more, but make sure she knows you're not doing any of it because you're just trying to get some. If she knows you value her more than sex, you'll oftentimes get both. Get that backwards, you'll get neither. Stop telling her that you love her. Start telling her why you love her. There is no reason you shouldn't be telling her how beautiful she is to you as often as you get the chance. When you leave for work or when you come home from work, I want you both to spend a full 5 seconds in each other's arms. When you go to bed at night, I want you to spend 5 seconds kissing and hugging. She should never go to bed without you telling her how much she means to you. That's 15 seconds that I just added to your day, and that alone can change your marriage more than you can imagine, and most men still won't do it. Number 4, what can I do to help carry some of your burdens? Does your wife feel like you help her? Or are we too absorbed in our own lives? Do we feel like it's not our problem to do the dishes or help load the dishwasher or change the baby? Or maybe we know that we need to do those things, we just simply keep forgetting to do it. It's destructive either way. We've already talked about how some things will be natural for you and other things won't. For most men, helping her with the mutual chores won't be natural. It will have to be a daily reminder for you. But ignoring it or continuing to forget, however innocent that seems, it continues to chip away at the trust in the marriage until there's nothing left. And it's rarely about the chores. She's rarely complaining about the dishes per se. She's not just angry, she's scared. Scared that she's married to someone that she can't rely on. Because whenever she asks for help, you blow her off. Whenever she says she feels like it's all her responsibility, you tell her how hard you work outside the house, and she should just be grateful. Or you agree and you say, yeah, sure, I'll do it tomorrow. And then you can't even remember 24 hours later. And when she has to answer the question subconsciously, does my partner have my back? Can I trust them? Are we a team? The answer keeps coming up, no. And if she can't trust you to remember to help with the dishes, if she can't trust you to notice that she's doing 90% of the mutual chores and care enough about that to change something, that makes her not want to trust you with her. So she pulls away until she's able to live a life completely separate from you. And by the time she divorces you, you'll be the only one who's shocked because the warning signs were there all along. You were just blind to them. Number 5, am I a safe place for you to be vulnerable with? Now, most men have no idea what vulnerability even is. Vulnerability is opening up to your spouse, taking a risk and allowing them to know the real you, the good, the bad, the ugly. Sharing a fear or a struggle or a need or a desire is hard because you think they might think less of you. But to not share those things and to not want your spouse to share them with you, weakens the connection and the closeness in the relationship. And asking these questions takes courage. And if your wife answers them honestly, which you should absolutely invite and encourage her to do, that takes courage and vulnerability on her part. And that's why it's so important for you to be a safe place for her to share anything that's on her heart. Because the fastest way to destroy a relationship is to hurt someone, even unintentionally, when they are being vulnerable with you. The problem is, most men were conditioned and taught to turn off their closeness and their vulnerability metrics inside of themselves from an early age. They were essentially told, stop feeling. Feelings are for sissies, except for anger. You can feel anger because that's manly. Why do you think he defaults to it so much? It's the only one he was allowed to feel. And this is why self-awareness and emotional maturity are vital to your relationships. Because the best marriages are comprised with two people who seek to fully know one another and be fully known by each other. And men, if you don't know yourselves, you can't know your spouse. That's part of the reason she consistently complains that the relationship doesn't feel like it has depth or closeness in it. I once heard someone say, if you don't deal with your childhood traumas, your relationships will. And the best thing that any of us can do is pursue self-reflection and emotional intelligence. The best thing any of us can do is get someone else's opinion on whether or not we have any blind spots that we might be missing that will ultimately hurt our relationships. Are you doing that? Number 6, do you have any past hurts that I have caused that you never told me about or tried to forget about because you were afraid I would respond with blame or defensiveness or dismissiveness instead of listening and understanding? Never dealing with unresolved hurts and past pain in your marriage is a massive catalyst for disconnection and distance. And of course, we should be forgiving and giving the benefit of the doubt. But if you've caused pain in your spouse, and in the past, when they were vulnerable with you, you responded with blame or making fun of them or dismissing their hurt, that causes wounds in the relationship, which ultimately destroy the trust and the intimacy and the vulnerability, and over time, the marriage. And the best thing we can do is settle accounts, clear the transgressions by asking about them from a place of humility and compassion and remorse. Men, we tend to think of ourselves as leaders, right? But how many of us are going first when it comes to repenting or apologizing? How many of us are actually saying, I'm sorry, I was wrong, and I want to do whatever I can to repair the hurt that I caused, even unintentionally? Because that's what heals marriage wounds, not time. Great husbands understand that. Number 7, when something is important to you, do you actually feel like I listen and prioritize it? Or do you feel like I downplay and dismiss you? Because we all say, if something's important to her, it's important to me. But how many wives actually feel like that's true? Few marriages end due to an abundance of affection and consideration and friendship and intentionality and selflessness. Millions of marriages die due to a lack of those things. Number 8, what's it like to be married to me? What's it like to be on the other side of me? Do you know what it's like to be on the other side of you? Most people never bother to ask. And when they get divorced, they will just do what everyone else does. Blame. Do you know how many spouses ask these questions in their marriage? Very few of them. If you could look into the divorce courts, how many couples who are divorcing now do you think asked these questions to each other in the past? Is your guess 0? Mine too. And yet, do you know how many spouses have intentions of having a great marriage filled with friendship and connection and passion? All of them. Stop saying you want a great marriage when you don't have the slightest idea what's required to get one. Men, stop saying you want more sex in your relationship when you're not creating a climate of consistent connection or consideration or closeness or compromise or some other C word. I can't think of one right now. I was on a good run though. Stop saying you love your spouse when you're not practicing selflessness or sacrifice or service towards her, because that's how love is demonstrated. And do you know what asking these questions does besides temporarily embarrass you? It says your perspective matters to me more than my ego. It says I'm invested in this marriage. It says I value your opinion of this relationship. It says I want to prioritize you. It says I care about you more than any conflict that we might have. It says your hurts matter to me more than my pride or arrogance. Does your spouse feel that way about you? Because they need to. Is it hard? Yeah. Humility and intentionality and being purposefully considerate and compassionate is hard. But let's not pretend you aren't good at hard things. You fixed your truck, you got that degree, you built your house, you worked your way up to supervisor or manager or CEO, or you became a pro athlete. Stop acting like your wife is too hard to figure out. She isn't. I get it that some of this stuff seems foreign and it seems stupid or unnecessary, but I'm just telling you, this is what makes or breaks your marriage. This stuff is important, and you can wait until your second divorce before you trust me, or you can start benefiting from it today. And when I ask men about their intimacy with their spouse or what their goals are for this marriage, they all shrug and say the same thing. I don't know. I'm just telling you, great husbands don't stop at I don't know. They act like their marriage is important enough to figure out. So start asking questions that lead to a great marriage that you both deserve. I promise you'll be glad you did. Thank you so much for watching. I can't wait to see you in the next one.